Hi, I'm Anne Connelly. I'm blockchain faculty with Singularity University and on the board of directors with Doctors Without Borders. Today on the show, we're going to learn about what blockchain is, how it's changing the world for people in developing countries, and how it's going to impact your business.
Congratulations! You are tuned into Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Show, the #1 podcast for Fortune 500 executives and those who are dedicated to creating a quantum leap in leadership. Your host, Dov Baron, is the founder of FullMontyLeadership.com. He's an executive mentor to leaders like you, a contributing writer for Entrepreneur Magazine, CEO World, and he's been featured on CNN, Fox, CBS, and many other notable sites. Dov Baron is an international business speaker who was named by Inc. magazine as one of the top 100 leadership speakers to hire. Now, over to Dov Baron.
Welcome, dear friends, fans, and fellow aficionados of leadership excellence. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Leadership and Loyalty Tips for Executives. I'm your host, Dov Baron, and I'm here to assist you tapping into the one thing in your business that changes everything by transforming meaning into action. You can find out more about me by simply going over to dovbaron.com. That's DOVBARON.com. So let me ask you, in what ways do you need to up-level your leadership? When you think about blockchain, do you immediately think of Bitcoin? I know I did. What's more, I thought the whole blockchain thing and non-physical currency thing was something that was not really related to me as a leader or to you as a leader. I was wrong. Stay tuned, you're about to find out why. Now remember, you can chat about this episode or any past episodes inside of our Facebook and LinkedIn groups. Just simply look for Leadership and Loyalty Podcast. If you're a new listener, new viewer, thank you for joining us. Strap yourself in. We're about to go full Monty. As always, you can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever it is that you tune into podcasts. And we always need your help in staying relevant. So please go over there, wherever that is, tune in, and, maybe do us a favor, rate, review, and subscribe to the show. You can also catch us on Roku TV, where there's over 100,000 subscribers. And if you're a regular listener, a regular viewer, thank you for making us the #1 podcast globally for Fortune 500 listeners, according to Inc.com. And that's because we have over 2.5 million listeners for every single show. And you can also catch us on Google Home and Alexa by simply saying, play Dov Baron Podcast. Thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. All right, let's strip it down and dive right in. No one can deny that we are in an age of disruption, some of which you can see every single day. However, much of the disruption that's going on is going on behind the scenes. And in fact, there are many of us of a certain age who clearly remember a time when before the internet. That being said, my guest today is here to talk to us about something that she believes will be even more disruptive than the internet. Can you imagine that? Well, our guest today on this episode is Anne Connelly. Anne Connelly is passionate about using blockchain technology to transform the lives of people in developing countries. She is blockchain faculty with Singularity University and the board of directors for Doctors Without Borders. On top of that, she was nominated as one of CBC's 12 youngest leaders changing Canada and one of the top 50 most inspirational women in technology. So ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together and help me welcome Crypto Decoder, author of the graphic novel Trust, Anne Connelly! Welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm glad to be here.
It's good to have you on. I was, as I said, you and I had chatted a while back, and I had seen you April of 2019 at Singularity University in Canada, and was really taken by your understanding of blockchain and crypto. And for me, it was a subject that we were talking about it before we started recording, that I know nothing about, wanted to know more, but a bunch of people reach out to me. And it's one of those subjects that I think a lot of people feel a bit thick about. Is the reason I wanted to have you on, because if somebody starts talking to you about blockchain or cryptocurrency at a party, you're like, oh, somebody else is over there, I gotta go.
It's true. This is it's not an easy subject. It's one of those that you just sort of think,
Yeah.
I'm going to wait and learn about this later.
I get the glazed donut look on my eyes.
But it's not as hard as it needs to be, that's for sure.
So we're going to get into that in a minute, and I want to jump into that. But I always like to start my conversation by asking, this is a leadership program. It's about leadership. It's about loyalty. It's about influence. So I always want to know who might be someone maybe we don't know, maybe somebody we would never have considered, who has maybe been a major influence on you and on your leadership.
That's an interesting question for sure. I think I have to for sure start with my father. He's an entrepreneur in his own right, and throughout our lives showed us both as boys and girls in the family that we could be leaders and how we could be entrepreneurs ourselves, and that's been amazing. But I think I also have to give credence to all of the female leaders that are out there today, because they've pushed through a lot of the barriers that women still face as leadership in my world, but they did it 10 or 20 years ago when it was much harder. And so you have to look at particular leaders in the Canadian space. Arlene Dickinson is a huge one. She's built a media empire and communications. Yep. Can look at Kristen Stewart, who led Twitter Canada and some other great organizations here, and just really give them thanks for the work that they put in and for being role models for people like myself, but also young women across the country.
I really appreciate that. And I always like to not be generic and be specific, and you did that with your dad, but the understanding, as you and I were talking about earlier, the understanding that we need more female leaders, and it is increasing, it is getting better. But as you said, there were the trailblazers. One of my wife's inspirations that she talks about a lot is Rosa Parks, and just the act of defiance and saying, no, I won't tolerate this anymore it's vitally important. And I think it's something that is lacking in leadership and society today, not just across women, but across leadership, is the active defiance of saying, this is not okay.
Absolutely.
I think it's really important. Yeah. Thank you for that. I appreciate it. So let's jump in and let's ask the glazed donut question, which is, what is blockchain? What is this thing?
Sure. So the way to think about blockchain is it's an infrastructure level technology. So it's something that you can build other things on top of. And there's many different types of blockchains out there. Bitcoin is a blockchain, Ethereum is a blockchain, and they'll have different properties that make them more useful in different use cases. But when it comes down to it, a blockchain is just a ledger. It's just a record of transactions, and that's really it. So if you imagined if every transaction of value that happens between people and banks and corporations and governments every day, if all of those transactions were stored in one single record, that's kind of like a blockchain. But the difference is that these the transactions are stored in little chunks called blocks, and the blocks are connected in the format of a chain. So that's why it's called blockchain. And these chains have a couple of really important properties that make them incredible. And one is that they're public to all users. So if you have a private blockchain that's used, say, between a group of banks, then all the transactions in that chain will be visible to all of the banks. But if you have a public blockchain like Bitcoin or Ethereum, everyone in the world can see every transaction. So for example, if you loaned me $1,000 and I said, oh, I never got the money, I don't have to pay you back, you can point to the transaction on the blockchain and show everyone that in fact I did receive the money. So I wouldn't be able to hide behind that lie. Now, the second property is that they're immutable, which means that once a transaction is made, it can't be edited. So if you loan me $1,000 and I paid you back 10, I couldn't edit that transaction to make it look like I had paid you back 1,000. Not possible. And then blockchains are essentially power proof. So if I was really good friends with someone who had created a blockchain, I couldn't just go to them and say, hey, listen, like, I owe this guy $1,000, I can't pay him back. Can you just turn the blockchain off? Even the person who created a blockchain wouldn't be able to turn it off, which means that essentially it's no one who has undue power over a particular chain could actually turn it off and prevent people from accessing it.
So we can't have a fire in the records room. Is that
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
Oh,
But
sorry, there was a fire in the records room.
Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. But the most important part about blockchains is that a copy of the chain is stored on thousands of computers all over the world. And these are computers like my laptop, some guy in China's desktop computer. And so essentially means that even if I were able to hack one of the transactions in one of those blocks, I would have to do it on at least half of all of those computers at exactly the same time. Otherwise, the other records wouldn't match, and everyone would know that there was a problem with that one. And so essentially, it creates this record of transactions that is a single source of truth for every person on the planet, which is pretty amazing.
How did it start? Like, that was one of the things that was fascinating to me. How did this whole thing start? Because I know that, if we take it into the cryptocurrency thing, this idea of cryptocurrency was like, oh yeah, it was really cheap, and then it went insane. But how did the whole idea start?
There was a lot of talk around the idea of digital money for a while, but the problem with digital money in its original formats is, say, when you're taking information from like a physical newspaper and turning it digital, it's amazing because you can, with one click, send it, 100 times. But with money, you want to digitize it, but not be able to duplicate it. Otherwise, you're going to take the same $5 and send it to 100 people, and then we're going to be in trouble.
Right.
And so the first real inklings of cryptocurrency as we know it came from a person called Satoshi Nakamoto. And we don't actually know who this is. It might be a man or a woman or a group of individuals. It's right now an unknown mystery. And they wrote a white paper in 2008, and it was the beginning of Bitcoin. And it talked about a peer-to-peer cash system where people could send money to and from each other and could do it without needing a central player in the middle, like a bank. So today, if you want to send money to someone, you need to go through some sort of financial institution. And with Bitcoin, you could go directly peer-to-peer, which was pretty amazing.
So here's what's interesting to me. I, in 89, was speaking about the potential control systems that would take place as we moved into what I called a non-physical cash system. And I talked about a universal currency that would go across the planet. And I will be very clear in saying that I know that I'm stepping into the conspiracy theory side of things, but I want to have people grasp this because, I talked about how this will be a way to, on the surface, it will look great because, you don't have to exchange rates and all the rest of it. You won't get, back in those days, you were still getting paid cash in an envelope. Will be gone. It'll all be easy to recognize and all the rest of it. And, you can walk into it and your cash will be gone and everything will be on a card. Seems great. And I said, the challenge with it is all your money will be completely trackable. There's no money hidden under the mattress or any of that kind of stuff. And it's a bit bogus on that side of it, but it will be sold to us it will remove dark money, because there's more dark, we know today, there's more dark money circulating the planet than there is light money, right? So was I wackadoo on that stuff?
It sounds like you're actually like way ahead of your time, to be honest, because that's really, Bitcoin to a certain extent is that. It's a global currency. You don't need to exchange it for anything else. Everyone can use it. No one can tell you can or can't. And it's changing the way that we move money.
But is it, because first of all, one of the things that I talked about it was the challenge, and I didn't see it as an independent. I saw it back then as something that maybe would be put in place by the World Bank. And I can, I do follow those kinds of things. And I do know that the World Bank don't like it much when the currency changes. They weren't particularly fond of the gold dinar. And we know what happened over there without going into too many details. They don't like it when the US dollar is not the central currency. They don't like those kinds of things. So how are those banking systems that are very old, all the way back to the Medici's, how do they feel about moving towards a cryptocurrency?
I mean, we're seeing a lot of projects in the banking space more on the blockchain side, more on looking at how can the back end technology actually create efficiencies within the system. So
Right.
interbank transfers, settlement, that type of thing.
Yeah.
You're not getting the same approval on the cryptocurrency side. And that's a control issue. The cryptocurrency and blockchain is fundamentally changing power structures.
Right.
And you're right, they're the power structures that we've built our society upon and that we've had for hundreds of years.
Yep.
And so we're going to see across, financial systems, across governance systems, that there's going to be a shift. And those who are in power today are not likely going to be happy with that shift, but it's going to happen anyway. And I think the difference in looking at, say, a World Bank managed cryptocurrency is that with Bitcoin, it's not owned or managed by any one party. It's owned by the crypto community that uses it. In the same way that if you asked who owns English, there wouldn't really be an answer to that question. It's owned and evolved by the people who use that language.
Right.
And so Bitcoin is a little bit the same.
I'm asking you to be a bit of a futurist here, but how long do you think it will be before we are totally in non-physical digital money?
That's a good question, because there's a difference between the adoption that we'll see in sort of North America and Western Europe societies and between, say Africa, South America, that type of thing. And, when I look at cryptocurrencies as a Canadian, we have a fairly well-functioning financial system. Crypto doesn't really solve problems for me. But for people who live in Zimbabwe, where they had, a multi-billion-dollar inflation rate in 2008, for people living in Venezuela today, cryptocurrency is actually a really important part of ensuring that they can have a store of value and keep their life savings from eroding away at the drop of a hat. And so, in terms of actual hard predictions, I think we're going to see greater consumer level adoption within the next 10 years. And in terms of actually getting rid of physical cash, it'll take a long time. That's also a cultural change that has to happen, but I think we'll see it in my lifetime.
Because, it's one of the things I heard you speak about that I thought was fascinating, because as companies are global or becoming more global, we are expanding often into countries and cultures that are not familiar to us. And so, I was particularly fascinated by and I want to come more into your work with Africa, et cetera, in a few minutes, but I was particularly fascinated with this idea of how cryptocurrency is being used or could be used more beneficially in places like Zimbabwe or in places like Venezuela, or in places that are under political unrest or, all kinds of challenges where money can literally disappear.
Yeah, and I think that's where we're very lucky to be living where we are, in that, it's never a concern really that if we have money in money format, it's not going to disappear. But that's just not the case for a lot of people. In the case of Zimbabwe, it was 2008. I think it was like an 80 billion% inflation rate. And what ended up happening is salaries essentially became meaningless. Schools and hospitals shut down. People stopped going to work. People were seen going to the market with wheelbarrows full of cash to buy food. And what fundamentally happened was society essentially broke down completely. And for them, having an option to their local fiat currency is a really important thing. And so we're seeing the same thing in Venezuela. They've got, I think it's a 50 million% inflation rate. And it's gotten so bad that people are actually starving, because the person who brings home the median wage at the end of the day only has enough money to buy 900 calories of the cheapest food available. And so for them, it's, what started as a financial crisis has become a humanitarian emergency. And it's led to a migration that's greater than the Syrian migration. So it's become quite a crisis down there. And it all started with, bad governance and bad monetary policy. Yeah,
we can go off on that tangent for a couple of weeks, you and I too, which would be a fascinating conversation, but not particularly appropriate for here. But it's So do you see blockchain and digital currency as a stabilizing factor? Is that what it can be, is, or should be? Because
I
those
think
are different.
it's going to be massively stabilizing, but massively destabilizing as well.
Right.
And that's going to come from, I mean, blockchain's main action as a technology is to disintermediate centralized parties. And so these centralized parties are things like corporations and governments and, you know, mainstays that we've built our society upon. And so if you don't need government to, for example, provide identity to people anymore, because people can have their own identity that's based on blockchain, you know, their role in society starts to degrade. And then, of course, you have fewer jobs. Things happen in ways that we've never seen before, where you can go back to transacting peer-to-peer, for example, and you just don't need these centralized players. So it will cause a massive change in employment, what we need. There'll be people, you know, losing jobs, but on the whole, I think it's going to massively reduce corruption. It'll make it easier to transact for business. And I think it's going to make life better, particularly for people who are struggling in the world today.
So when we look at things like, you know, we know that the money has been in the hands of the banks and the governments, but this seems like it could also change it to, you know, you look at things like Libra, I think it was called Libra, right?
Mm-hmm.
The Facebook currency, which I think got its balloon burst, but it's, you know, there's lots of that. I mean, I read recently that, you know, since my original conversation with you, I went and did some research. I was like, oh, I can start my own cryptocurrency, a kind of Dogecoin, where I can get an app and create a Dogecoin. I'm like, what the hell, you know? Is there a danger? Is it a good thing for us to, you know, I'm concerned about putting things into the hands of, say, Facebook, who may or may not have my best interests.
Yeah, so I have very sort of mixed feelings around Libra. So I want to start with the positive elements first.
Mm-hmm.
And for a lot of people around the world, Facebook is the only way they can access the internet.
Yes.
So a good example of this was Myanmar. They got the internet in 2001, but by 2012, still less than, I think, 1% of the population was using it because it was simply too expensive. But Facebook launched this free basics program where anyone could access Facebook for free on their mobile phone. And so for a lot of people around the world, Facebook is indistinguishable from the internet because it's the only way they can connect. So for people like that, they're not able to access Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. So for them, Libra would be an alternative to their local currency. And I think choice fundamentally is a good thing. That being said, it's really important to understand that Libra is not a decentralized currency. So Libra has handpicked a group of companies to be a part of their network. And it, you know, it was Uber and initially the credit card companies, I think they've backed out now. PayPal was involved. So there's, you know, essentially you're looking at a quote unquote cryptocurrency with high censorship, low decentralization. It's quite dangerous actually. And so if you think about, you know, the slippery slope and where things could go with this, imagine that you've got, you know, all of your money in Libra on your Facebook platform or Messenger or WhatsApp, and you post a photo of yourself breastfeeding your baby, and you get kicked off the platform because your nipple was showing. And all of a sudden, your money is locked in here. You can't access it. You can't, you know, transact because this is how people are, you know, moving money these days. That to me is very scary. There's also high risk of financial censorship. You know, Facebook saying, well, we don't want you to buy a subscription to Twitter or whatever it is that you're buying because they're our competitor. And I think, you know, given Facebook's history in terms of their ethics, it would be highly likely that they would get into that.
Yeah, see, this is why I think it's confusing for so many people, is because there's this decentralized idea, and then people jumping on that, like Facebook, or, you know, or a Dogecoin or whatever it is, and then really I'm in control of your money now. So you've really just swapped me out for a bank, and maybe an even more biased bank than before.
Exactly. I think it's very scary to imagine one single American man controlling the entire world's financial system. So, and Mark Zuckerberg of all of them is probably not the best choice. So,
Yeah, let's be honest. I mean, I do use Facebook, but let's be honest. Men's a stretch. I mean, the haircut suggests that he may be a synth.
Have you seen there's a website that's like taken photos of all of his different haircuts and put them all together? I think it's an AI that can determine, is it Mark Zuckerberg based on the haircut?
Yeah, I just think that haircut, if we put all the money in Libra and Zuckerberg gets as powerful as he can be, then the haircut will become mandatory, like in North Korea. That is a mandatory haircut.
Exactly.
So we'll all be showing up on this show with the Zuckerberg's mom cutting our hair, so we all look the same.
Wouldn't that be a future?
I do hope not. So let's talk about blockchain in the context. I know this is a very important context for you, in the context of social impact and human rights. Because, we've talked a little bit about the dark side of it, but there's a very strong light side of it that you're very involved in. So talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, because of decentralization and removing these central parties from transactions that we do, blockchain can enable people who live under, say, authoritarian regimes to have freedom that they've never had before. So a good example of this would be around protests. So we've seen massive protests in the past couple of years. You just look at Hong Kong, Iraq, Iran, Chile, and often what can happen is that the government will actually shut off social media so that protesters can't communicate with each other. Right. And this is dangerous because it essentially takes people away from the digital public square and forces them back to the physical public square where they can be killed or kidnapped or injured. And this is because these social media sites are centralized. You can go straight to the Facebook office and say you're not allowed to operate for the next 2 weeks. But with decentralized messaging systems, the messages go across all those thousands of computers around the world. And so there's no central place to turn them off, which means that people can continue to communicate what's happening in their country and essentially enable them to have freedom of speech in a way that they might not have today. Certain countries have actually taken this further and shut off the internet. So governments have shut off internet across their countries during protest times. And this has happened in a variety of places. Iran, India has done it, I think 154 times in the past 2 years. In Kashmir right now, the internet's been down for at least 100 days. And there's one Canadian company called RightMesh that's doing some really exciting work around blockchain-based mesh networks. So a mesh network is essentially, if you imagine if one person had access to the internet through, say, a satellite connection or something, and someone else needed to get out a message, like perhaps there were human rights abuses that were happening, they wanted to contact the BBC, they could send the information to and through the cell phones of the people who were nearby, kind of like a game of broken telephone, but one where the message stays intact, until that message got to the person who had the internet and they could send it out. And any person who participated in that would get a little micropayment of cryptocurrency for supporting the network. And so that ensures that essentially governments can never turn off the voice of their people.
I was in Iran a few years ago speaking, and which, by the way, I love the country and love the people there. But of course, social media is turned off, but it's not. I mean, the thing about human beings is they will find a way. I mean, just with VPNs, I mean, I was like, oh, I can't get on anything. And the guy goes, oh, just do this. And what? And okay, there you go. And it's totally accessible. So it's kind of like it's turned off, but it's not really. So is there any real threat with these kinds of things? I mean, because it seems like, that's trying to control a wild beast. You can't really control the internet. It may not be easily accessible in the way that you and I have it, but it is accessible for anybody who wants it.
I probably wouldn't agree with saying that. I mean,
No?
I think if something is, if someone is really dedicated to finding a way to making it happen, sure. But if that's not easy for someone who's got 3 kids and needs to talk about what's going on, or,
No.
there's accessibility comes in a lot of different ways.
Right.
If you're not as tech savvy as someone else, you don't have the bandwidth to, take the time to do that. And so that's where I think it's just really important that we have options for people who are under these types of threats, and people are very resilient, and, as you say, they find all these options that they can find, and that's great. But I think we need to be providing them with as many options as possible. It's a bit of a game of whack-a-mole. Anytime the government shuts down one particular type of solution, you've got another one that's ready to go.
Yeah, and the other side of that, again, is like you said about Myanmar, the problem with a lot of these countries is the available news is through a particular social media, i.e. Facebook. And the problem is, if that is a biased media, then you've got biased news, because people, you know this probably better than I do, that a lot of the research is coming back to say that for many countries, they think Facebook is the news.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that is certainly not a full perspective on the news. It is definitely one-sided. And, when they say, oh, well, we're not going to stop Russia doing stuff, well, okay, then we know it's biased. And the problem is that, you and I may have I wouldn't say the cognition, but certainly the awareness that these things are happening. A lot of people don't. They're just like, oh, well, that must be true, right? So
yeah, actually, to your point, Facebook was criticized for being involved in the genocide of the Rohingya Muslims in Myanmar.
Right.
So it was exactly what you said. News came out on the platform. It was propaganda of sorts, and there was no other counter to that information.
Right, and this is the danger, because it's a one-sided media, which is always going to be a problem. I don't care whether you're left or you're right. A one-sided media is definitely going to be a problem. It's not what it's supposed to be about. The fifth estate falls apart if we don't have that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, I want to come back in a moment and talk to you about your work with African youth and your graphic novel and Doctors Without Borders and all those in a moment. But first of all, I have to say that this episode is sponsored in part by Magcast, Magcast, Magcast. Imagine having your own industry magazine. What would you do with that level of authority? Whether you're a coach, a content expert, or an emerging brand, it's hard to stand out in the crowd. So what if you had a proven way to increase both your perceived authority and your professional status in the eyes of your market, and you got to do it all at once? The way to go from being invisible to getting meetings with absolutely anybody. To find out more, you can go to Magcast. That's magcast.co. So magcast.co, where first-time publishers create thriving magazine business. That's magcast.co. Going over there, it's amazing. I have blown away by what it is they're able to do. And I've fortunately been featured in many of the magazines right on there. Okay, let's come back to our guest. Our guest today is Anne Connelly. She is passionate about harnessing blockchain and decentralized technology to transform the lives of people in developing countries. As I said, her and I met at Singularity University, where she is faculty and teaching global leaders how exponentially technologies can solve problems that impact over 1 billion people. So let's come back, and thank you for being with us. I really appreciate it. Let's talk about your work with your continuing humanitarian work with Doctors Without Borders, because this predates your blockchain world, right?
It does, yeah. I started working with Doctors Without Borders in 2010. I went on mission with them in Central African Republic. So we were running a pediatric malnutrition and malaria program in probably one of the most remote places I will ever be in my entire life. We had no water, no electricity, and definitely no banks.
And nobody took you for a local.
Nobody took me for a local. No, I was taken for a ghost a couple times. Oh yeah. I mean, many of the children in this town would never have seen a white person. And so we had a lot of fun with that.
White blonde woman would definitely be a ghost.
Yeah, they called me Munju, which is essentially kind of a translation for white ghost.
I love it. That's fabulous.
Yeah, it was pretty fun. It was, one of those situations in your life where the highs are really high, the lows are really low. It's very challenging, but it's very meaningful work.
How did you become involved with them?
I had always been excited by healthcare and a little bit of adventure. And in my undergrad days, I had run a small NGO doing health education worldwide. And after my MBA, I did an internship with them in their Toronto office, and then just realized, this is for me, and applied, got trained, and missed my graduation from my master's to go over and work with them.
I heard you tell a story about how that work with NGOs, how that really in many ways has led you to the cryptocurrency thing and carrying money. So
yeah, absolutely. So working in Central African Republic, we had about 200 staff, and every month we had to pay them. And of course, we're in the middle of the jungle here. There's no banks, there's no financial institutions, so everyone is paid in cash, which makes sense and is great. So I spent more time than I would like to admit actually counting out little piles of money to make sure that everyone got their salary. But most people don't really think about the logistics of operations like that. It's like, how do you actually get enough money to pay 200 salaries to a tiny village in the middle of rural Africa? And the answer to that question is that I used to carry knapsacks full of money through military checkpoints and rivers and all kinds of things, just to make sure that we could pay the people who were treating our patients and doing the work.
What was that like? I mean, that must have been pretty harrowing.
Sometimes I wonder how I'm still alive. I think when you're 25 and a little more naive about the world, it doesn't seem so bad. But now I'm like, that's insane. But we didn't have another option, which is why, 10 years later, when I learned about Bitcoin, or maybe it was 5 years later, I guess, learned about Bitcoin, and I just realized this is amazing. We could pay all of our staff right from, Europe headquarters with the click of a mouse. It would drop into their cell phones, and no one would ever have to put themselves at risk. And that, applies to both people like me carrying the money, but also the staff themselves, who would have to, walk away from the office with a pile of cash. So it was pretty exciting to think about that.
Were you ever in danger?
Oh,
I mean, immediate danger. I mean, obviously the situation is a dangerous situation. Carrying a knapsack full of money in Central Africa. I get the general, but did you ever feel imminently in danger?
There were one or two moments that were a little on the sketchier side. I got quite lucky. I mean, there are humanitarian workers that get kidnapped or get taken hostage while they're robbed, and that's very scary. But yeah, I lucked out. I think I didn't have anything too bad happen.
Yeah, because again, you don't exactly blend in, right? So it's not like you can go undercover, right? So how long did you spend out in Central Africa?
I was about 7 months in Central African Republic, another couple in Democratic Republic of Congo, and then I worked for a little while in Malawi and South Africa as well with different organizations.
Wow. What was that like for you culturally? Coming from Canada, I mean, that's a very different world.
It's a shock. It's a shock. I think you just realize, how lucky we are, how many things just work on a daily basis. But it also helps you realize how little you actually need to be happy. There was one day, I think our accommodations, were very sparse. We lived in a tent for a while and then finally got a house. And one day I got a shelf, and I was so excited that I had a shelf and I could put my 6 or 7 things on it. And I had found a jar the day before. I could put my toothbrush in the jar, and it just kind of reframes what really matters. And it's, friendships and people you work with, and doing good for others. What
was some of your, if you had to pick a real high and a real low from those, do you have a story of those?
Yeah, I think for the high, for sure, there were just these groups of children in the village who were just amazing. And they would follow me everywhere, just laughing and making jokes. And I, mostly didn't know what they were saying, but it was like I had this little posse of fun friends. And I can remember one moment just sort of stopping and realizing, I can't believe I live here. This is amazing. And that was great. But the low moments were, a lot harder. We had a child that we thought might have had Ebola, and we just didn't have everything that we needed to treat them, and he died. And you can't you can't let the family take the body home. You have to wrap it, and we buried the child out back. And you've got to it's and you're very alone out there. You've got the couple of people that you're working with, but your friends and family are very far away, and we didn't have good internet access or anything. We had cell coverage in one of the towns we worked in, but not the other. And so it's very challenging. Your world becomes very small, and so you feel the highs and the lows much more strongly than you would in sort of normal society.
Do you feel like it changed you?
I think it did. It made me a very good problem solver, I'll tell you that. I mean, when your generator breaks and you'll have nothing to light the surgical unit for 3 weeks until the part comes in, you get creative, and we ended up sort of putting the battery in the truck, driving the truck around, taking the battery out, using that to light the hospital. But those types of moments happened all the time, where you didn't have what you needed. You couldn't buy it anywhere nearby, and you had to figure it out. And so you really makes your brain quite creative in terms of what you can do with what you've got.
So it was the access to the MacGyver part of your brain.
Exactly. It always reminded me of that scene from Apollo 13 where, they're back at NASA trying to figure out how to help them. And they dump this box of stuff on the table. It says, this is what they have in space, make a carbon dioxide filter. And that was sort of what we were like every day.
I'm sure. I mean, I think that, one of the things I'm very keen on is this understanding of what I call leadership in action. So authentic leadership in action, and what it means by that is the ability to adapt to what needs to be done in the moment and be present with it, while considering the humanity of the people around you.
Absolutely.
And oftentimes I think that we're very good at adapting to what's going on, but often at the cost of people. Right.
Yeah,
so,
and I think this adaptability is going to become probably the most important leadership skill moving forward, because historically, companies didn't move that fast. Everything was fairly slow. When I did my MBA, you're taught to kind of drive a moving ship. And with the way technology is headed, and with the exponential change that we're seeing as a result of technologies like blockchain and AI, you can't do that anymore. You have to be agile, even in large corporations, and that change has to come from leadership. And people are going to be a big part of those changes. So I absolutely agree. You have to be quick moving, but with a mind to what is the impact of this on your employees and the people in your community.
Yeah, I think that it's very interesting. The people of, companies have always said, oh yeah, our greatest assets are our people, but that has not always been true, even though they may have said the words. But now, because the power is in the hands of the talent as opposed to the employer, that has to become true, or else people just go, oh, okay, I'm out. Mm-hmm. And they go somewhere else, or they'll do something else. As I've said, the wonderful thing about the internet is that it's given people the ability to say, I don't like it here, I'm going to go start my own business. I got $20, I can buy a URL.
Exactly. It's totally democratized access.
And if I understand blockchain, I can even take payments that, without having any of the other stuff. So yep. It's a fascinating, like I personally think that we're going to move into a lot of this a lot faster, because of Moore's law is getting knocked on its ass constantly. So I think that there will be, I think there'll always be some form of currency that is, I think that there'll be an undercurrent of cash that is used, but only in certain things. But I think that generally we're going to have to adapt much faster. The other thing that I just wanted to just touch on here, because I want your understanding on it, is the dark web in the context of cryptocurrency. because most of what people know about cryptocurrency is that it's used by drug dealers and it's used by people who want to put a hit on somebody. And one of the things that really is very concerning to me is it's used in human trafficking and human slavery as a way to exchange. So do you have much insight on that you could help us to?
Absolutely. I mean, I think Bitcoin's got a stigma that it got from its early days, in a sense, you know. And so in the early days, a lot of it was used for purchases of drugs online, that type of thing. It's a very small percentage of what it's used for today. And, you know, to that point, I would say, you know, what percentage of cash is used for drugs, what percentage of banks are laundering money. You know, I don't think it's Bitcoin in itself that's creating this issue. I think it's just a tool that, you know, criminals are also using. I would also say, though, that blockchain is actively stopping things like child sex trafficking. So, for example, if a child has a decentralized ID, like an identity that's based on blockchain that isn't owned by any government, if someone kidnaps them and tries to take them across a border, then they can't cross the border if the child is not accompanied by someone in their inner circle of friends in their identity. So they're, you know, say their mom or their dad, if they're not accompanied by one of those people, they can't cross the border. And then an immutable record of that attempt is made on blockchain so that you couldn't bribe, say, a customs official and say, let's just pretend this never happened. That record couldn't be changed. And so there's all these benefits to blockchain on the side of human trafficking and that type of thing that are going to make a really big difference. We're just kind of in the process of creating them and rolling them out, but there's some really amazing potential there.
That is so wonderful to hear. I assist with certain things and familiar with certain people who are doing a lot of work in ending slavery and all that, and who are just looking at all the different ways to get in the way of that. And I really want people to know that this is one of the great things about blockchain, and the potential positive is that we can make a stop of a lot of this stuff that, you know, the bribes that allow things to happen.
Exactly. Yeah. And there's a great story about, there was a woman named Rahaf Mohammed who she was in the news about a year ago, and she had fled her abusive family in Saudi Arabia. She was on her way to Australia, got stopped in Thailand when she was switching flights. And the Saudi government had called the Thai government to say, you need to confiscate her passport. And they were going to deport her back to Saudi Arabia. But long story short, she barricaded herself in a hotel room, wouldn't come out until UNHCR would help her. And she's safe now in Canada, which is amazing. But none of that would have been possible if she owned her identity instead of the Saudi Arabian government. If she had ownership over her blockchain-based decentralized ID, no one could turn it off or confiscate it from her. So,
you know, there's a whole big conversation between you and I that we won't have time to go into, but this, you know, because you've said this 3 times, and I want to jump in on the first one, but I know it's opening a Pandora's box, and that is this idea of government-owned identity, because I think that 99.9999999% of people have no idea that they have a government-owned identity. And again, that was one of those things I talked about in 1989. And that you actually, the reason you have a social security number is because you have a government-owned identity, and you get that right off so you are the property of the government of your country you live in. And that's like, what? When I tell people that, they're like, yeah, well, that's conspiracy. No, that's actually a fact.
It's true. Yep. And there's a lot of places where if the government doesn't want you to have an identity, they'll revoke it.
Right. So in the context of blockchain, how would that be different? Because I can't see a government allowing.
Well, so that when you think about a person's identity, it's really, you know, you're making a claim about who you are. Say, I'm Anne Connelly. I might add some proof to that, like I've got a utility bill with my name on it or something, and then add attestations. So, you know, family members or friends that would say, yeah, I attest this is Anne Connelly, I know her. And so there's all these elements of someone's identity that are not captured in, say, your passport or your driver's license. It's all these, you know, yes, I went to school, yes, I did this, that, over time will actually create an identity that's much stronger than just having the government say, yeah, we think this is Anne. It actually enables you to strengthen who you are and the validity of your identity over time. And so that's where I think, I think most people will probably have government identity in some format for at least my lifetime, but it will only be a part of the entirety of their ID. And so, for example, if you're trying to cross a border and let's say, the US government shuts off your US passport, you can say, well, I'm trying to get back home to Canada or whatever it is, I'm trying to get somewhere. The US has turned this part off, but look at all this other evidence that shows that I belong in this location, that I have a home here, that I'm, have friends and family and that type of thing. And that's where I think it's gonna make a really big difference, is what we consider a valid ID will have to change over time.
Because, I mean, there was a big push and a lot of legalization made illegal, which was around being an independent citizen, global citizen, and owning your own citizenship and applying for global citizenship. And there was originally even something called a global passport, but all that got revoked because, and part of it was to clean up illegal money and money getting laundered around the world, but a lot of it was to control the situation. So with the governments and the banks, it's a fascinating, for me, at my age, observing it and now wondering where it's going to be in 20 years, it's a fascinating journey for me to watch what the resistance might be and the freedoms might be from it. So I don't believe anything is all good or anything is all bad. And so you're absolutely right. There's going to see a lot with this. Yep. I want to talk to you before we finish. This is important. I want to talk to you about your graphic novel.
Yes.
First of all, why a graphic novel? So here's a woman who was involved in, she's faculty for Singularity University. She's blockchain. She understands all this digital financial. She's worked with Doctors Without Borders. Digital novel? What? Graphic novel? Come on.
I have to credit my mother with this idea. She actually came up with it and said, you should write a graphic novel. And I just thought, this is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. Where is she coming from with this? And then I was like, this is brilliant. Because one of my goals with the blockchain space, it is primarily white and male, and there's not as much diversity as there needs to be. And we are fundamentally building, the infrastructure of the future of the world. And if you're not getting people from all the communities that are a part of this world in the building of it, you're going to miss out on key elements that need to be there. And so part of my goal around my work with Singularity is, of course, education and bringing more people into the communities that we're in. But there is a gap in terms of particularly access to education and conferences and that type of thing for people living on the African continent. And so I have a very good friend his name is Chief Niamwea. He's an artist based in Nairobi, Kenya. And he's had some incredible graphic novels that he's published historically. And so I went to him and said, look, could we collaborate on a graphic novel that would really dive into the storytelling culture of Africans, particularly in East Africa, and tell the story of a young woman who learns about blockchain, uses it to transform the community around her as a means to get people inspired and excited about the technology. And so that's what we're doing.
That's fantastic. And is that readily available?
We're in the works on it right now. So we're hoping it'll be ready to go by the end of 2020.
And it'll be called Trust, right?
It's called Trust, yeah. And it's we've got a website at trustgraphicnovel.com, and there'll be lots of information there.
We want to make sure that people find out about this, because I think that, again, this is another example of shifting change and times and education. And a lot of traditional education, I think, is dead in the water, personally.
Absolutely. And one of our goals too around the book is access to education. And so we want to make the digital version free to access for anyone. And it's being created mobile first, so it's accessible on mobile phones for kids everywhere. And So we're looking for, networks of people in the tech and education sector across the continent that we can share this widely as possible and get it in the hands as many kids as we can.
Yeah, because if you can create a digital version of a graphic novel, I mean, that's not just entertainment, but edutainment. It's that is a phenomenal value, right? And just because, again, the glazed look when people start talking about crypto and talking about, blockchain, like, oh yeah, whatever, I gotta go. And then, but hold on a second, here's a graphic novel that teaches me the understanding of the concept or the potential impact of it. That's phenomenal. So I really want to applaud you on that. I just thought it was like, that is bloody brilliant.
Thank you.
Well, really, because, I'm looking at doing a graphic novel with one of my things, and it's for exactly that reason. But for me, what you're doing, and with something that is so nebulous to so many of us,
Mm-hmm.
that was nothing we could really get a hold of. It's so like that's solid. I mean, I love it. So
thank you. Yeah, we're pretty excited about it. And I think just for all the youth that'll be reading it to see the problems that they see around them in their community and know that, hey, like here's a technology that I can learn to code in and I can use to solve these problems, I think it's pretty exciting.
Yeah, that's awesome. It really is. What would you say is the biggest misconcept about what it is you do in the context of understanding blockchain or digital currencies?
I think the biggest misconception generally around Bitcoin and crypto is one that it's all about cryptocurrency and that, it's not this broader blockchain and all the impact that blockchain can bring from decentralization. And then again, that it's just affiliated with drug users and human traffickers. And that's really when I do education, is trying to change that mindset and say, hey, look, this is, that's might be where it came from, but it's not where it's going. And this is going to change your government. It's going to change your supply chains, your legal systems, all these type of things. And mostly that for leaders, if you're leading a company or an organization that is an intermediary in one of these transactions, that, blockchain might be something that's going to actually replace you. And so how do you adapt your business to ensure that you're still providing value in a world where you're not actually required anymore?
So in that context, what would be a piece of really good practical advice for leaders who are listening, watching us?
I challenge everyone to go out and buy $1 worth of Bitcoin. That's it. You don't have to invest. You don't have to, like hang your shirt out on the wire, but go and buy $1, learn how to do it. I've got a great blog on it that I can share out, and just see how that works. What's the process? What's it like to have ownership over your own money and participate in a peer-to-peer economy? And I think that'll be a really good first step for everyone to wet their feet a bit and get into this world that is massively transformative.
So why don't you just give us the link right now? Tell us what it is, and then we'll...
It's on my Medium page. So if you find me Anne Connelly on Medium, or I'll tweet it out. I regularly tweet it out. It's at Anne_Connelly.
Okay, good. We want to make sure that people have access to that, because I know that you just said that at the end of when I saw you speak at Singularity U, I was like, what, you can buy $1?
Yep. You don't have to buy a whole Bitcoin. That's probably the greatest misconception that everybody has. You have to buy a whole Bitcoin.
What is, as we record this, what is Bitcoin valued at?
It's around 7,500 today, I think.
Right. Yeah. And I can remember when a friend of mine bought some at 1,700, and he was like, oh my God, this is insane. Right. And he'd be like praying for it to be that now.
I know. Every time there's on Twitter, there's lots of people saying, this is the last time you'll be able to buy it before it goes to 10,000, and then it goes up and it goes back down again. And, I say to everyone, if you're going to invest, don't invest more than you're willing to lose, and be ready to watch it drop by half overnight, which is a very harrowing thing to experience, but just hold on.
The other ones, like I think it's Ethereum, that's a Canadian one, right? Is that Canadian?
Yeah, Ethereum. It was founded by Vitalik Buterin, who's a Russian Canadian. He's brilliant, but founded out of Switzerland technically. But yeah, there's a lot of ones out there. Ethereum in particular is a great blockchain because you can build applications on top of it much more easily. So you may have heard the term smart contract. A smart contract is essentially kind of an auto executing contract where, say, let's say I want to pay you $100, but only if it's 15 degrees outside, you'll tie that contract to a weather site, kind of oracle that will give you that information. And then once it triggers, it's an auto payment.
Wow. I mean, we are just, like I said, we're in a time of massive disruption and innovation. There's no doubt about that. But so much of that, I think, is behind the scenes. For 99% of people, we just don't even have an awareness of this. And I really appreciate you making this accessible and consumable, and having us not feel like we're a bit thick.
Oh no, it always takes a little while for the information to settle. If you don't get it the first time, try again, and you'll have this aha moment one day, and it'll all suddenly start to make sense.
Yeah, well, I know that was how it was with the internet, because like I said, I'm old enough to remember a time before the internet.
Yeah.
And like you said, this is likely and potentially, this combined with AI will definitely be more disruptive than the internet was on its own. So
absolutely. A lot of people in the space say, where blockchain is like the internet in 1994. It's people can't really understand what it's going to be used for, how it's going to impact their lives. But if you think about the impact it's had on us now versus 20 years ago, that's sort of where we're at with blockchain.
Yeah. It's amazing. It's been awesome having you here. I would love for you to share with our listeners, with our viewers, more where they can find out more about you and all the resources that you have, including the book.
Absolutely. I'm at anneconnelly.ca and on Twitter at @Anne_Connelly.
So that's Anne with an E. Connelly is double N, double L. So, and it's .ca. So please make sure you note that. And then your graphic novel?
We're at trustgraphicnovel.com, and we're on Twitter as well. It's, I think, @trustgraphic.
@trustgraphic. Fantastic. Well, it's been awesome having you here. Thank you so much. I hope you'll stay with us to the end. It's been truly a pleasure. And like I said, I feel enlightened immensely. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And for you, dear listener, remember you can hang out with other conscious leaders and chat about this episode or any past episodes by going into either our Facebook group or our LinkedIn groups, or both, and just look for the Leadership and Loyalty podcast. If your employees and customers don't understand what gives your company meaning, no matter how successful you are only working at a portion of your capability. To find out more about how you can hire me, Dov Baron, as a speaker or strategist for your organization, take yourself over to fullmontyleadership.com/consulting or fullmontyleadership.com/speaking, where we provide you with the essential leadership skills to rekindle and amplify the hidden loyalty assets inside of your organization by tapping into purpose. fullmontyleadership.com, because you can't outsource authenticity. I want to thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. Till next time, stay curious, my friend. Stay curious about the future, not only of Bitcoin, but of blockchain and how it's going to transform everything you do in business. I'm Dov Baron. I'm here to assist you tapping into your deep greatness to reach the next level of clarity, focus, purpose, and profit in your business, your life, and your leadership impact. And I am out.